That's it, going live now for you. So, hi everybody. This is the Reading Between the Lines Online Crime Book Festival, the very first one. This is the first panel. This is the Noir panel. So, enjoy everybody.
Thank you, Lindsay. My name is Douglas Skelton, and I will be your ringmaster for today's performance. We have some great acts for you, and Claire MacLeary. And let me just give you a quick rundown of who we've got for you today. We've got Anna Smith, who is an award-winning journalist, reporting from the front line all over the world and Glasgow. She has covered conflicts from Somalia to Rwanda and Kosovo and Glasgow, where she witnessed the plight of tragic refugees, genocide, and hideous ethnic cleansing. She's also worked on major investigations, unmasking drug dealers and paedophiles, as well as reporting on the Dunblane massacre and 9/11, where she was one of the first journalists on the scene. Claire MacLeary lives in Edinburgh at the moment, but she's also stayed in Aberdeen and Fife, and she returned for a time to her native Glasgow. She describes herself as a feisty Glaswegian with a full life to draw on. Now, I can tell you through personal experience that she's the one to watch here because she's tricky. Following a career in business, she gained an MLit with distinction from the University of Dundee, and her 2017 debut novel, Cross Purpose, was longlisted for Bloody Scotland's McIlvanney Prize for Scottish Crime Novel of the Year. J.D. Kirk lives in the Highlands of Scotland with his wife, 2 children, and a number of sturdy umbrellas. Now, I'm quite disappointed we've not got a sturdy umbrella on screen here, but maybe later.
There's always one close to hand somewhere.
Always. Well, you're in Scotland. Despite writing from a young age, A Litter of Bones was his first novel, crime novel, and combines his love of the Highlands, crime thrillers, and cats. J.D. Kirk is not his name. His real name is Barry Hutchison. What do you want to call me? What do you want me to call you, JD or Barry?
I answer to most things, to be honest. Whatever you feel comfortable with, Douglas.
Okay, George. What does the JD stand for?
I have absolutely no idea. Okay. No clue whatsoever.
Finally, we have Allan L Mann, and he's a leading figure in the business aviation industry in the United States, and he's coming to us today from Kentucky. So how exotic are we getting?
Worldwide audience here.
He has over 30 years of flying experience. His first full-length novel, Tools of the Trade, was the first in a trilogy featuring retired Scottish detective Sergeant Tom Guthrie. He lives in Georgetown in Kentucky with his wife, 3 girls, 1 cat, an English Springer Spaniel, and 2 goldfish named Rebus and McCrae. What does the L stand for, Alan?
Lindsay, my middle name. So spelled differently from our Lindsay Adams up there, but that's Clan Lindsay.
Okay, let's go to. I've got questions here, but first. Let's go to Claire first. Do you want to tell us about your new book and maybe do a couple of readings?
Yes, this is the short straw coming up first, Douglas. So my new book is called Payback, and it's the 4th in the Harkis and Laird series. And the series revolves around 2 unlikely private detectives, Maggie Laird and Wilma Harkis. And Maggie Laird was married to a cop who died in questionable circumstances, inherited this really struggling wee detective agency. And she's petite, she's a bit uptight, bit of a snob. Her neighbour, Wilma Harkis, is the complete opposite. She's big and brassy and loud and a wee bit dodgy. And together, these 2 very ordinary women with no qualifications set out to do extraordinary things. So, but the books are not cosy crime. They're what my publisher politely calls gritty. So they're pretty dark. But there is much about the back and forth between these 2 women as about the crimes themselves. So I'm going to read you a wee bit of banter between Maggie and Wilma. Wilma gave Maggie a sharp dunt in the ribs. Clock that. What? They were on the number 19 bus, bound for Bonnecord Square, where they were to give a presentation. Maggie craned her neck. Crowning a full-length photograph, the banner headline read, "Socialite found dead." She turned to Wilma. "Anyone we know?" Wilma thrust her head between the two windows in front to get a better look at the newspaper. "Looks awful like non Annabel Imrie." "Give us a mo." She shot out of her seat. "I'll go and check." Maggie watched her partner bend the bald man's ear, then wrest the paper from his grip. "You're a star," she heard Wilma exclaim with a suggestive pucker of her lips. Maggie didn't know whether to laugh or cry. On the one hand, she had to admire Wilma's nerve. On the other, they were two professional women travelling to a business appointment and couldn't afford to get involved in a fracas. "See?" Wilma waved the paper. Baldy man turned, stripping her with lascivious eyes. Wilma threw him a stage wink. "It says here she was found dead in her home." She wrinkled her nose. "Can't say I'm bloody surprised." "What would you know?" "Thought you hadn't met in years." "Annabel was brought into A&E not long since. Right bloody mess from what I heard. Claimed she'd been assaulted." "You saw her, did you?" "You kidding? She was in a private room. Couldn't get near for folk dancing round her. Story goes it was down to drink." "Who told you that?" "One of the porters." "But a porter, you said? How did he?" Wilma shrugged. "Hospital porters know every last fucking thing." "Shush," one of the wifeys in front whipped round. "Mind your language." Wilma cast a sly look at Maggie, who'd flushed pink with embarrassment. "Excuse my French," she said in an affected voice. "Me and my friend," she flashed the newspaper headline, "have had bad news." "Oh," the woman's eyes widened. "I'm sorry." "Don't mention it," Wilma responded, poker-faced. Lowering her voice, she turned to Maggie. "Eck, that's my wee pal's name. Says they kept Annabel Imrie overnight as a precaution. Her being high profile and all. Proper cow she was too. Had everyone running after her, consultants and all. Treated them like shite. Seems success went right to her head." "Eyes alight," she said. "Wouldn't it be magic if some buggers done her in? And the cops were toiling. And we got to take on the case. We could." "That's not going to happen," Aggie hissed. She'd had a belly full of Wilma's flights of fancy. "If, and it's a big if, Annabel Imrie has been the victim of foul play, that's none of our business." The animation wiped from Wilma's face. "You may have a tenuous connection with the woman," Maggie allowed, "but there's no way we're getting mixed up in another police investigation. From now on, we're going to operate within our remit and level of competence. Slow and steady, didn't we agree?" "Aye," Wilma conceded, reluctance written all over her face. "S'pose."
Now, I should have warned you about Claire. Now, the first time that we did an event, Claire, you did a reading, and I remember we were in Waterson's in Argyle Street, and you read a racy bit out of your book. You did that on purpose to me, didn't you? Because you know I'm very easily embarrassed.
Well, I did it on purpose because one of the bloggers said afterwards, "Who would have believed such a respectable looking woman, such things could come out of her mouth?" And
yeah,
I think it's just a bit of sport to be subversive, really.
And you've already broken the swearing threshold for the festival. It's barely 10 minutes in.
Oh, yes.
Claire MacLeary has the air blue.
I blame it all on the Daily Express. It was my first job after uni, and I swore like a trooper within 3 weeks. But you guys will know all about that, Anna and Douglas.
Yeah, we blame the Daily Express for a lot of things. Anna, you're next. Do you want to talk about your latest and give us a reading?
Yeah, I'll give you a reading now. You'll need to tell me if I'm over 2 or 3 minutes. If it feels a bit long, then I'll just stop. It's only a short prologue. I'll read from the third in the Kerry Casey books, which is gangland thriller set in Glasgow and partly in Spain. Now, Kerry has been the reluctant gangster, really. She took over from the family, having been a lawyer. She took over after a big tragedy that starts in book 1. And she's trying to get them out of the mire of drugs and heroin and all this stuff that they've made their money in. So she's now invested the money, albeit laundered money, in a big hotel complex in Spain. So she's the dream of which was her father's old dream long before he died, to be legit, basically. So that's what she's doing. She's moving out of that, but then there's her father old friend called Rolfie, William Wolfe, comes in, and think of the diamond heist in London. So he's been involved in something like this. They've stolen the millions and millions and millions of pounds of the diamonds. And he's been betrayed by his people, so he's looking for somebody to move them. So she can't resist it because it's her old dad's mate, so she does it. And this is when the people who own the diamonds and own the strong boxes that they stole, everybody's out to get her, including some Russians and all that kind of thing. So it's, that's that book, and I've just finished the latest one, but we can talk about that another time. I'll read you just a short prologue of it, and there'll be a lot more blue here in a minute now. It's obviously a newspaper background where you had to split words to swear. So we'll see. There's one word that I'll not use at the end, but if I get to the end, like it's not my favourite word, but it's all over my books. Okay, this is the prologue, and it's Wolfie's point of view. He was screaming, but behind the duct tape it was no more than a muffled choking sound. Only his crimson, sweating face and the fear in his bulging eyes told of the terror. His ankles were bound tight, and he taped his hands across his chest and secured them fast to his body, like the corpse the 6 psychos had planned to make him. Wolfie struggled and thrashed as much as he could inside the white satin-lined coffin. But all that was happening was that his heart pounded so hard he felt it was about to burst. He saw them coming towards him with the coffin lid. They were actually going to fucking screw it down. He could hear the whispers and sniggers. They looked up at their faces, so he would remember every single one of them. The whispering stopped, and all he could hear was the blood rushing in his ears as the lid was placed over the coffin. Pitch black. Then the sound of the screws being turned. And he tried to gulp in a breath of air, but there was none. Wolfie had no idea where he was when he'd come to after he'd been clobbered in the head in a multi-storey car park. But he swiftly realised he was in some fucking funeral parlour, and he wasn't one of the mourners. His head had been thumping from the blow in the temple that had brought him to his knees, and from the corner of his eyes, he could see it was already swollen. Not that it seemed to matter now. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, he could see himself as a young man, a girl in his arm, the free, happy charmer he'd been all his life, and the grief that had overwhelmed him when he lost her. Christ, his life really was flashing in front of him the way they said it did. In the face of his darling daughter Hannah, the beauty she had turned into, and the sadness that the last time he'd seen her, he'd been sitting opposite him in a visiting hall, her face thinner, but her eyes dancing with the same rage and determination as ever. She was getting out this morning, and they'd be going to disappear, the two of them, far away for a new life. They were rich beyond belief. This shouldn't be happening. The diamond heist had been his fucking idea in the first place. He was the guy who had masterminded the whole operation. He was the man who had put himself on the line, working away inside the bank for the past 3 months, observing, checking, making pictures and plans. When the alarms went off, and most importantly, it was him who had managed to sniff out the security numbers to get into the vault. So the success of the whole operation hung completely on him. And these fuckers, who were now about to either bury or cremate him, could never have pulled the heist off without him. What kind of treacherous bastards did that? There was no honour among thieves anymore. That was the problem. All lowlifes and cardboard gangsters who talked the talk hawking their heroin and coke, trafficking women, selling kids as slaves. They were just going to rub him out like he was some old has-been once they got their hands on the safety deposit boxes that would not just make them millions, as it would turn out when they saw the contents, would also make them bomb-proof. That was why I hadn't told them much about where the gear was. I'll just quote the second last paragraph around. And who knows, maybe there was something better on the other side. You could hear pipe music. Pipe fucking music. Nearer, my God, to thee. Jesus fucking wept. Then suddenly the crack of gunfire. 1 shot, 2. Then the familiar rat-a-tat of machine gun fire. His heart stopped. The plinking of glass shattering and groans and angry, urgent shouts. Someone banging on the coffin lid. Then, with all his might, he gagged as he tried to shout. The sound of the lid being hacked open and battered and finally prized open, and daylight on the face of big Tommy Gurley, wide-eyed and flushed. Tommy leaned in and ripped the masking tape off his face. Hallelujah! What took you so long? Wilfred asked, breathless. Sorry, boss. Trouble trying to find the right fucking funeral panel. And that's the prologue, so I think there might be a few funny words in there to start with.
Well, if I can tell you that my dog is lying on the floor here with his paws over his ears, because he's not used to that sort of thing, you know.
Gritty is the word.
JD, Barry, George, what's your next one? What's your latest one? And do you want to give us a reading?
I actually have a new book out today, as it happens. The 7th DCI Jack Logan novel, The Big Man Upstairs, is published today, but I don't have it with me, so I'm not going to read from that because I'm a very disorganized person. So I'm going to read from the first book, A Litter of Bones, just a really short little extract that kind of introduces 2 of the main characters of the series. If you're sitting comfortably, I shall begin. DCI Jack Logan sat in a moulded plastic chair and gazed upon the face of evil. For its part, the face of evil smiled vaguely back at him, its eyes shimmering in confusion, never quite focusing all the way on the visitor. Logan wasn't buying it. He had never bought it, no matter what the doctors said. Owen Petrie, Mr. Whisper, the papers had called him back in the day, back when he'd abducted and murdered 3 wee boys and done his damnedest to snatch away 2 more. It was statements from the 2 close calls that had led to the nickname. They'd both mentioned his voice as he'd tried to talk them into his van, a soft, whispering rasp, and the tabloids had lapped it up. He sat in an old-fashioned, high-backed armchair now, cowed and shrunken by the size of it. Back when he'd been on the outside, he'd been a right dapper Dan, suiting and booting it whenever he was out and about, shirt, tie, the works. Now he sat slouched in an old pair of grey joggies and an off-white T-shirt that was threatening to drown him. Food stains dotted the front of it, varying shades of orange blemishes, suggesting curry was a regular staple on the hospital menu. He hadn't shaved in days, or been shaved, Logan supposed. His stubble was a salt and pepper lavvy brush, heavy on the salt. His hair had been trimmed on the left side of his head. The right side was mostly bald, the hair there never having grown back around the site of the injury that had put him in his current condition. Supposedly put him in his current condition. The room was a private one, and as drab as any of the others in the hospital. Aside from the chairs, there was a narrow bed, a narrower wardrobe, and a desk that never got used. The edges of all the furniture had been smoothed off, the corners chunky and rounded. There was a good-sized window, divided into much smaller chunks by a crisscross of sturdy spars. The bleakness of the view. The window looked directly onto another, even grimmer section of the hospital, pleased Logan immensely. Good enough for the bastard. Too good. And I shall just leave it there. Thank you very much.
And last, but certainly not least, we have Allan. So what are you going to read from? And Is it your latest?
This is one I'm working on. It's the second of a trilogy of the Tom Guthrie series, all set in Angus, Tayside, where I grew up. It is so new. I ripped a couple of pages out of my notebook, so I'll just read basically a setup for you. Guthrie is retired for reasons that you find out in the short stories and the book before. And but he's been called in a bit like Sherlock Holmes, the consulting detective. But so he's sitting in an office in Dundee. Guthrie took the mug of coffee from Riddle and sat down. The office was small but functional. A couple of family photographs sat on top of a filing cabinet, piles of paperwork arranged on almost every other flat surface. Riddle took his seat behind the desk. How well do you know the Glens, Tom? Guthrie thought, not well. Why? We've got a cold case we've been asked to clear up. Been asked to clear up, Guthrie said. Riddle picked up on the meaning behind the question. As opposed to just working it as normal, you mean? Guthrie smiled. Riddle slid a thick file across the desk. He opened the front cover and turned it around to face Guthrie. Guthrie picked it up and saw a photograph and a name, beneath which were some personal details, including the man's title. Minister for Enterprise, Energy and Tourism. Geoffrey Miller? He looked at Riddle, who nodded. Well, obviously I'm familiar with the case, but frankly I'd forgotten it hadn't been closed, so why the push now? It's political, Riddle replied. We're getting it in the neck from a couple of MSPs, normal shouts of incompetence and inefficiency. The pressure to find out who committed the murder is piling up, not just here in Dundee, but higher up the food chain. Serious crimes can't provide us with additional manpower. They told us if we want to bring it to the top of the list, we had to fend for ourselves, for now at least. Sounds familiar, said Guthrie. What else? Well, just to please the politicians, we have a press conference set up for this afternoon so we can hit the evening news, make it public that we're putting more resources on it. But you really can't get the resources from serious crimes. Nope. Riddle took a deep breath. Can you believe it, Tom? Well, honestly, no, I can't. You're telling me Sirius is so backed up they can't provide you with enough resources that you need to call a civilian into what is still one of, if not the highest profile cases in the country? Riddle looked like he'd just been hit with a cricket bat. I'm sorry, Bill, but is this the right thing to do? Tom, you have no idea. I mean, no offense, but the thought had crossed my mind. No, I hear you. I get it. I've been promised everything I need, and I need some serious help on this case. I can't wait for everyone to get their act together and rearrange resources and schedules, sign off potential overtime and the like. It's been so long since the event that it would be like starting over, worse than starting over. I need to get this kicked off, and I need the experience someone like you can bring. Are you sure, Bill? My track record isn't white as the driven snow. Look, Tom, I need you with me on this. We need to close this case. I've been promised more help, but I've got to show we're going in the right direction. Show progress. What did Brian Campbell have to say about it? He's totally on board. In fact, I asked if you were available. Riddle smiled. He raised his coffee to his lips, paused for a second, then took a sip. Guthrie sat back and smiled too. Be careful what you wish for, Bill. I know what I'm getting. The two men looked at one another. Then Guthrie picked up his coffee and raised it in a salute to Riddle. So? Riddle asked. So what? You up for a bit of consulting work? Guthrie laughed. Well, since my last project finished, 2 weeks ago, and I know my diary has a bit of a gap until forever, I might as well do something with my time. Riddle walked from behind the desk and offered his hand to Guthrie. Welcome on board, Tom. No rest for the wicked, right? Do you need me this evening for anything? Asked Guthrie. No, like I said, I'll be working this evening on the briefing, so I'll see you here at 8. We're setting up an incident room in Brechin. It's more central to the locus. We'll drive up there, I'll show you around, and we can talk on the way. I'll bring the file and you can get caught up on the way. How does that sound? Sounds like I need to get home and get some sleep. You just said no rest for the wicked. But I'm an angel, Bill.
The title of this panel obviously is Tartan Noir. So what do we think? What is the difference between Tartan Noir and any other kind of crime fiction? Barry, can I come to you first?
I mean, for me, I think there's a unique sort of Scottish sense of place, I think, in a lot of Scottish crime fiction that really identifies it as Scottish. And also, I find in a lot of Scottish crime I read, there's that undercurrent of humour that goes through it, that kind of black comedy, that sense of black humour that Scottish people often have. So that's what makes Tartan Noir for me. It's that sense of place and that sense of humour.
Anna, what do you think?
Well, I think Tartan Noir, it's what Barry said there about when you look at something's Tartan Noir, you're going to get that attitude, that sort of sass and the swagger that you get in Scotland and in cities in Glasgow, places like that. You're going to get that. My only slight concern with any kind of noir that names a title at a place like Nordic Noir or whatever is that readers might think that they're only going to get you're sort of pigeonholed only in Scotland. I kind of put my books, all of my Rosie McGilmer books were always all over the different countries, so that it felt better for me to do it that way, but also so that you get other readers from other places. But there's no doubt that Tartan Noir has, and any kind of other noir, but Tartan Noir is caught on now, and people kind of know what they're getting with it. I just think you should be able to vary it a bit and go to other lands, which I do with all my books, to get out of the country.
Yeah. Well, that's a typically Scottish outward-looking attitude, isn't it? Let's go somewhere else. Claire.
Yeah, I would echo both of what Barry and Anna said, the sense of place, the humour, and also with the caveat that Anna added that, it is a bit of a kind of rubber stamp Tartan Noir. I think that, the one thing that it doesn't tell us is the variety within the label of Tartan Noir, even the variety of humour. Anna was saying, we were talking about sass and the kind of humour, the kind of upfront humour and the gags and the crack that you get in Glasgow is quite different from the couthy kind of humour you get in the Aberdeen that I know, particularly in the hinterland, where I worked as an antique dealer, going to Raups every Saturday. And you got this really kind of much more downplayed, much more interesting, but humour all the same. So I think there's huge variety within Tartan Noir, and I think that maybe doesn't always come across.
Alan, what do you think?
Yeah, I'll keep it short and sweet because I'm the last guy. It's all been said. I do think that there is a variety. Living in Kentucky in the States for the last, since 1991, I think that, I tend to look at Scotland with rose-tinted glasses a little bit and rely on things that were happening 30 years ago when I was there. And when I look back at the country itself, it's attitude and its atmosphere, and I like places. But Scotland, being such a small country, has such a wide variety of place, has such a wide variety of accents, has such a wide variety of humor, and I think that's what makes it so interesting for such a small part of noir. It has such a wide variety that you can dive into.
Of course, living in Kentucky, it would be bluegrass tinted spectacles that you'd be looking at us through.
That's right.
Why did you all want to start writing, and why crime in particular? Claire, can I come to you first for that?
Oh, well, I had been self-employed. I've been in business for years, and I'd always written. I read English at uni, written short stories, had very modest success getting short stories published. But when I looked at going back to writing when my kids had left home, and I looked at it with my business head, and I thought, what is the route to getting published? And when you read the bestseller list, when I read it at least 10 years ago, it was all crime or memoir that were in the top 10 or the top 100 or whatever. And I thought, maybe not so much that I'm not old enough for memoir as I had to wait a wee while so that it wouldn't be just quite so libelous. So I opted for crime.
Claire, the world is not ready for your memoir, I'm sure. Anna, what do you?
What started me out? I think I suppose I was writing from an early age. From as soon as I could lift a pencil, basically I was writing these stories and living in my imagination a lot of the time. And that's the main reason I joined, became a journalist, was with a view to being an author. But it took me 20-odd years, 22 years before my first book was published. But the great thing about that is during that time you gather so much experience that you could have characters like Rosie Gilner and cops and editors and whatever. And but I think a lot of the time, in the writing I did as a journalist, I never got any celebrities. It was always the shitty end of the stick, and I was always parading through high flats at 3 o'clock in the morning and interviewing junkies that were being sick on my shoes and things like that. So you kind of from that, it used to stay with me when you come home. And you're probably the same, Douglas, in things, characters that you've met, they stay with you. And I think probably unconsciously I was squirreling a lot of that stuff away. So when I started to write, I started to write the Rosie books based on somebody with the same sentiment as me, but a bit more exciting than me. And that's just where it went. And I think that's why I think I started to write. That fed me. The journalism fed me, and I think that's just fulfilled a real dream to write.
Yeah, and people being sick in your shoes, that was just in the office as well, wasn't it?
Well, it could have been most afternoons, as you well know.
Do you think being a journalist has made it easier to write the books or harder?
For me, it's made it easier because you have as a tabloid journalist in the Daily Record, you had to write fast and create scenes, whatever, or create like scenes with. When you were writing your page leads or whatever you were doing, or a splash, you wrote very fast, so you knew about nice tight writing. And when I read some of the different crime that's out there, when you read some crime that's very literary and mine is very in your face, gritty stuff, that's probably coming from my tabloid stuff. When I started to write, I never dreamed of writing anything like Gone with the Wind or anything like that. I would be writing this as I saw it, and I think that the journalism has helped that, and it makes it easier for me. It comes quite easily to me to write in pictures. That's how I do it. And so I think it has helped in a lot of ways.
Allan, how did you start writing, and why crime?
Well, probably like a lot of folks, because I was reading it. I started back in high school, not writing really seriously, but we had a high school magazine, and a friend of mine and I did a full-page strip cartoon on the back of that. So that was really our first writing gig. It was about a cat and a rat. We wanted to call it Rum and Coke, but our headmaster, our rector, said no. No to that idea. I can't even remember what we named them, but it was a pure ripoff of Garfield. That was what the cat looked like. So we created stories when we were in high school. Since then, I mean, I just grew up. My dad actually is a retired police officer in Tayside, and so I heard all these stories. You come home at night, and every once in a while he'd share something that had gone on in Arbroath or a little place called Freakham, if you know where Freakham is. We lived in Freakham for a couple of years. And just all the stories that people got up to. And I sat there and I went, is this real? And a lot of them were really, really funny. And then, of course, I then started reading the obvious folks like Val and Ian and Alan Guthrie and folks like that. And I thought, I enjoyed this. I'm kind of creative anyway. So I thought, well, let's just write. And it was purely for my own benefit. I just wanted to write for me. And if someone wanted to buy the book, then great. So that's really how I got started.
Val and Ian, I'm sorry, I don't know who they are. I'm sure they'll go far though.
Val Smith and Ian.
Barry, what about you?
Well, I've wanted to write since I was 9. There's a moment actually that I can trace it back to I didn't read a lot as a kid, or I didn't read a lot of books. I read a lot of comics. And then the librarian that was in the little library attached to my school kind of started weaning me on to books and she had this massive stack of Dandy and Beanos in the library that I would go in every day and I would look through. And then she started kind of steering me in the direction of certain books. And I became a book lover. And I remember vividly going in one day, and I would go in and ask for books on various subjects, and she would always find me one and hand it over. And I remember going in one day and asking for a book on ninjas. I was obsessed with ninjas for that week for some reason. And she said, I don't have any books about ninjas. And I was devastated. I felt like the library had betrayed me and let me down. And she said, but hang on a minute. And she went through the back and she came out with a little notebook and a pencil and said, go and write a book about ninjas. So I wrote this god-awful story about ninjas. And I showed her it. And to her eternal credit, she wrote my name on the spine and she put it on the shelf alongside all the proper books. And it was like one of those moments, you see in movies when the clouds part and there's that shaft of light comes down and that's what it felt like. And I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to write books and have them on bookshelves. And it took me kind of 20 odd years. But about 12 years ago, I had a series picked up by HarperCollins Children's Books, a horror series. I ended up writing over 130 books for children. And then just over a year ago, back in 2016 originally, I got asked to go into a high school because as a children's author, you do a lot of workshops and stuff. And I got asked to go into a high school and talk about how secondary school pupils could publish their own work. And I had absolutely no idea how they could publish their own work because as far as I was concerned, all you did was type a book out, you emailed it to London, and a certain number of months later, a book arrived, and that was my whole understanding of the process. But they were offering to pay me money, so I decided I was going to learn how to publish a book. And I put out a science fiction book, a comedy sci-fi book called Space Team. I self-published it, and it immediately started outselling all my 130 traditionally published books by like 10 to 1. And there are now 12 books in that series and 3 spin-offs. And then just over a year ago, I've had this idea for a litter of bones. So for what happens at the start of this book is a child goes missing. And I've had that idea in my head for a few years, ever since my daughter hid on me when we were out walking somewhere and I was convinced that she'd been taken. It was the only explanation I could think of. And then she popped up from behind a bush laughing her head off. But that thought of what might have happened was playing over and over in my head for a year or so. And that's when I decided that I was going to turn it into a litter of bones.
Now, I had a look on Amazon before we started, and you seem to produce a book every couple of months, Barry. What do you sleep at all?
Yeah, I've always written quickly, not necessarily well, but I've always written quickly, and that actually comes from when I was young. This is how sad I was as a child. I had an old typewriter, and I used to just kind of before I could properly really string sentences together properly, but I used to watch the opening credits of Murder, She Wrote and type along with with Jessica Fletcher when she's typing on the keyboard. So I've kind of become. Did I just admit that on live? But I've become kind of really proficient in typing. Good, yeah, just edit that. So I can type really, really quickly. And I tend to write 4,000 or 5,000 words a day. And then do admin stuff in the afternoon. But yeah, I write very, very quickly.
Well, that's sickening. Right. So when before you start in a book, what kind of research do you do, if any? Barry, let's stay with you.
Very little, generally. I've tended to pick the subjects of my books that require the least amount of research because I'm naturally a very lazy person. So all the kids' books, none of them required any research. So we're all set in make-believe worlds, and there was no, there's always a small amount of research, but nothing too grueling. The science fiction stuff, completely made up, no planning, nothing, just waffled on for 80,000 words and then stopped basically. When it came to the crime stuff, that was the first time that I had to do any real research, and I deliberately set it in my hometown so I could do most of my research by walking and looking at stuff. But the police procedure side of it, I had to do quite a lot of research, and that's what put me off for a little while, was learning how an investigation works and all that stuff. And it was only when I came to write that I realized that you don't actually have to know an awful lot about how an investigation works. You need to know enough that the reader goes, yeah, that's fairly convincing, and glosses over it. No one picks up a crime novel to read about police procedure because police procedure is boring and it's mostly just knocking on doors and no one cares. So as long as I found as long as you could use a bit of the jargon, throw in a few acronyms, people are generally happy. So after that, my research levels have dropped somewhat again.
What about you, Anna?
Well, I don't do much research, especially for the Rosie books, because the Rosie books are all journalist books. She's a journalist and it's in the office, and instead of solving a crime, it's get your story in the newspaper. So I know how to prosecute that. So it was a kind of, I don't do much research from them. There would only be if there's a court case in it that there's maybe have to go back and check again from a long time since I've done that. So I don't need to do a lot of research. I don't have to go and sit in places where gangsters are, because I bumped into a lot of them and drank with a few of them in my day when I worked. And so when I'm doing the gangland stuff, a lot of that's just, I mean, I wasn't with the gangsters all the time, Your Honour. It was only now and again, but I know enough about them to exaggerate them and put flesh on them. So they seem to be believable. Much to my amazement, they're believable, and they seem to, the gangland books seem to do quite well, because I think people like to read about people gouging eyes out. I don't understand it, but they do. So they do very well. But I tend to not do a lot of research. I feel as if I worked as a journalist for years. I've done enough research, so I don't write books that would involve me doing too much research.
So you are Rosie, is that what you're telling us?
Yeah, well, she's a bit more exciting than me, but it's kind of, she would be the same compassionate and sentiments as I have, and chasing a story down and getting the bad guys and stuff. She would be very much like me in that way. Yeah. But, and I suppose in some of our private life as well, be a bit like that. But yeah, there's a lot of me in her. There's no doubt about that. But I'm not Kerry Casey, because she's completely out of my head. Kerry Casey's the gangster woman.
I'll come back to that thought. Allan, what about research for yours? How much did you have to do, if any?
Yeah, I don't do a whole lot. I'm like Barry. I'm really lazy. I think it was Colin Dexter, maybe wrong here, but Colin that wrote the Morse series, I think was credited as not knowing anything at all about police procedure, and so you really didn't do a whole lot of that. And I'm the same way. I agree. I think that I try and focus on building the characters across this series, and also the place. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit of feedback. So not a whole lot of research, just enough to get by, just enough to hopefully the reader will believe what I'm saying.
Yeah. We're all getting the feedback now. Claire, what about you?
Well, I didn't know anything about police procedure or forensics when I picked off, and I'm also screamingly impatient, so I tend to take the most direct route to everything. So I decided that the only way forward was to make these my characters women, and make them know really F all about when they kicked off as well. And also, I thought maybe the best thing would be to have a mole. So I've got a police mole, I've got a private investigator mole, and I've got a forensics mole. And then I do tend to kind of go around accosting policemen. Like if I see two police people in the street or in a van, I go in back and say, excuse me, if you come across someone, and there's two, if you just one go with the body to A&E in the other state, and it's amazing. If you look like me, I mean, people just answer you, it's fine. And then I do watch an awful lot of crime programs on telly. My husband has to sit through some dire stuff, and I record all these really horrendous. There was one the other man with the tent. Oh God, I recorded that. Can I look at it?
We seem to be getting that feedback again there. So if I can return to the if I could return to the idea about your characters, Claire, I'll stay with you. How much of you do you think is in your characters?
Oh, I don't really think. I think very little. I'm not. I don't think I'm big and brassy, like Big Wilma, and I don't think I'm as uptight as Maggie. So I think there's always some of you. I think there's always some of your experience goes in. Like I've used my experience as an antique dealer. I've used places that I've lived in or visited. But no, I'm saving myself for my memoir, I think.
Allan, what about you? Is there much of you in your character?
Yeah, because I'm not a dyed-in-the-wool writer like all of you guys. I'm obviously new to this game. I'm an indie. I have a part-time, full-time job in aviation that I have to do and sit in front of the computer every day. Yeah, there's a lot of Tom Guthrie in me, or me and Tom Guthrie, whichever way. I think sometimes when you're writing, if you're writing a character that is fairly close to you, then that character comes back to you. There's another character called Alistair, who is a young constable that he works with. And I like to think that Alistair is a younger version of me that wasn't quite as shy when I was 20-something. So yeah, there's a lot of Tom reflected. And Douglas, you're on mute.
I think we're not hearing anything.
We can't hear you, Douglas.
That's because I've muted my microphone. It helps, but I unmute my microphone. I've discovered that.
If whoever's not talking mutes the microphone, it might stop this feedback.
Oh, I don't know how. Oh, right. Okay.
So button down the bottom is mute.
Yeah, I see that.
There we are. The excitement of live online festivals. Barry, what about you? How much of you is in your central character?
Not really a huge amount, I don't think, because I've written kind of, as I say, over 100 odd books. I think most of me was exercised many books ago. I think I probably was spread across a few dozen kids' books. So probably not much. Part of it is probably wish fulfillment in some way. My characters can say a lot of the things to people that I might often wish that I could say myself. But don't, for fear of either being arrested or punched squarely in the face. So, yeah, I wouldn't say there's a lot of me in there, but I'd probably quite like it if there was more of me in there.
Okay. Now, thinking about, if you all think about what you've written, is there a scene in any of your books or short stories or whatever that you have particularly enjoyed writing? Who are not? Claire, anything that comes to mind?
The one that comes to mind is in the latest book, Payback, where I've got Wilma in a waxing salon. She's having her intimate parts waxed. And I just had great fun writing it. I have to say, it's definitely not me, and it's definitely not from my experience, but I thought it was quite funny.
Well, guys, we've all been there. Allan, what about you? Is there a particular scene that you've enjoyed writing?
Yeah, in Tools of the Trade, which was the first full-length book, without giving it away, the climax, which takes place in and around the harbour at Arbroath, and again, I won't give anything away, but I just got on a roll. It was one of those scenes, in fact, it was a couple of chapters really, that when you just started writing it, it just kind of flowed. I knew kind of where I wanted to go, and it went there, and I really didn't have to look up from the computer screen too often to get that finished and excuse me, on the screen or on the page. So yeah, that whole scene there, because it was pretty atmospheric as well. It was nighttime and the things leading up to it, and just that sense of place that I like to try and describe. So yeah, for sure, the climax and tools for the trade.
Okay, Anna, what about you?
I'm just trying to unmute my mic there. Yes, I suppose there's a lot of that's quite a hard question. There's a lot of scenes that I particularly enjoyed doing, especially in the Rosie books as well, and some of the books and some of the scenes in the Gangland stories, because they move very fast. But one scene that I quite like, and it's in this book, in Endgame, and there's a new character, completely new, and because some of the characters, as I was saying in my earlier books, would have been based a little bit on me, this is a completely new one. This is Wolfie's daughter, Hannah, who's in jail for I won't tell you why, but she's on the way out of jail, and it's the morning because she's in her cell, and she's counting down the minutes till she walks down out of jail and hears her feet clicking on the floor. And the scenes that followed that with her in it give me quite a lot of good thoughts, because it was a new character, and I can make her likable from that very first point that you see her in jail, and you see the kind of anger and the swagger and the vulnerability of her. And I quite like that, because as Allan was saying earlier, there was a bit of atmosphere on it. And then what happens after that? She goes to her flat to get her phone and things like that. After these years she's been in jail, she gets to find her SIM card hidden, and then something happens in there. So before the end of it's at chapter 3 or something in the book, you've got somebody who suddenly, I'm told anyway, that readers like, and I like the character Hannah. She's not in any other book, but I created that, and that felt good, because that's one of the scenes that you create from nothing, from a blank page, based on nobody that I know. And I quite like the scenes with her.
Oops, I forgot to unmute. Barry, what about you? What about you?
I kind of like any scene where I put the characters in an uncomfortable situation. My favourite one was in this book, which is the 5th book, I think, The Last Bloody Straw, and it's based on experiences that I had as a children's author, talking to young children. And DCI Jack Logan, the main character in the books, is brought in to talk to a group of kind of primary 1s and 2s and 3s when there's been a murder in the community, and he's been brought in to try to reassure them and make them just help calm them down a bit. And it just goes so disastrously wrong. He's so ill-suited for this task of talking to these little ones and trying to console and comfort them, that it ends up with them all convinced that their grannies are going to die of cancer. And there's all, it just goes so off the rails for him that I just loved writing that scene. But again, very much based on my own experiences of talking to little kids, so that's my favourite scene of the whole series.
Yeah, well, staying with you, Barry, just conversely, is there anything that you've written that you either now hate or wish you hadn't done?
Well, funnily enough, in the first book, there is one of the key parts of the book is that the bad guy of the book has been killing these cats, or there's the death of a couple of cats involved in the book. And it turns out that readers are perfectly happy for men, women, and children to be murdered. But if you kill a cat, they're really not happy at all. And the amount of negative reviews I got solely on the death of these cats, and the amount of hate mail that I received by email from people who were not happy I'd killed these cats. On reflection, I might not kill those cats. Other than that, I'm quite happy with things as it is so far.
Yes. Lesson learned. You do not kill the cat. You do not kill the dog.
No.
Okay. And I'm sorry about the hate mail. Anna, what about you? You'll need to unmute your microphone, Anna.
Sorry, I was doing that. I'm actually at a loss here now that you've come to ask me this, because I can't think of anything that I wish I hadn't written. I don't know if I could answer that, because I can't think of anything that I think, well, maybe I shouldn't have sailed as close to the wind as that. I don't know. Actually, the answer is I don't know. I know it is the honest answer.
Is there anything that you don't like? Is there something you've written that you now look back and say, I could have done that better?
Well, I try not to look back too much in my books and things like that and go over them, because there's loads of things that I think I could have done better. But maybe I couldn't have done better, because you have great editors that look at it and things like that. But sometimes you do look and you think, could have made more of that character that was only in there briefly, could have made it bigger in certain ways. So sometimes you get feelings like that, but I can't think of anything. I remember in one of the earlier Rosie books, there's a lot of scenes in there that are, and there's a bit of sectarianism in it and things like that, and it's about UVF and bringing in drugs. And some of the scenes that are in there are very graphic in a pub in Glasgow, when they're singing all the songs and things. And after I wrote that, I thought, that's really very graphic, and did you need to do that? And I don't regret writing it, but I know that I think it upset some readers of the persuasion that would like to go and march in the walks, and they weren't happy about it. So, but I don't regret it, because it was needed to make that character. You have to be careful sometimes.
I'm sure there's a lot of male authors who look back and wish they could have made it bigger. Alan, what about you? Is there anything that you wish you could have done differently, or something you don't like?
Yes, I think if Anna can mute her microphone, I think that's where the feedback's coming from. There we go. Thanks. Yeah, we talked about language right at the start, and that's what I did. So with Tools of the Trade, that was published in 2016, and it came out in paperback like 3 years later. And what I did was I reviewed the story, and I took out all the swearing, frankly. And I hate to bring up the R word here this afternoon. But Ian Rankin said that, just like Barry said, you can murder someone, 7 ways to the moon and back, and people just lap that up. But if you start bringing in a whole lot of language, in his experience, he got it in the neck from everybody. You can't kill the cat, you can't kill the dog. Well, I'm in Central Kentucky, bluegrass, country music, it's all about your truck dying and your dog dying and your, all that kind of stuff here. So, it depends on where you are, right? So I took out and there was very little in the way of cuss words, swearing, but I took it out and going forwards. So that's what I'm going to do. So it seems a little bit counterintuitive to be, noir and gritty and things like that. But hopefully I'm making that up with, through other ways of writing. So I've taken that out, and hopefully that will attract some folks that may not, go to the shelf and pull out crime fiction of any kind of sort because of that realistic language. I think that you can be at least try and get creative with your language in the way that everybody knows the gangster's going to F and blind all day long. But I think you can still make it believable. So not that I regretted putting it in, but probably learned something just by taking it out.
Claire, what about you? Anything that you've done that you wish you hadn't done, or that you really don't like?
Lots of things. Even when you look for a passage to read in a book, you think, oh God, I'd have chopped that. But I think in the first book, Cross Purpose, I had a gang of wee boys set in Aberdeen. I had a gang of school kids, little toe rags, and they were speaking very much in the Doric as they would. And of course that tied me in knots, because it definitely, I think, costs you sales if there's too much language that a reader, an English reader, an overseas reader can't understand. So I've had to tone down the Doric a bit, which is a shame.
Yeah. Now we're running out of time. We've less than 2 minutes, so very, very quickly. What's coming up next for you, and when can we expect it? Claire, you first.
It'll be the 5th of the Harkness and Laird series, and it should be out early next year.
Alan?
Yep, second in the trilogy, starring Tom Guthrie, Wind Damage. I read that little bit, centered around Brechin. Should be coming out in time for Christmas. And then the third one in the trilogy, sometime next year. And then it's going to change a little bit. The characters will remain the same, but I have another 6 stories actually that are in development right now. So in time for Christmas, watch this space. Wind damage.
That's great. Anna? Microphone. Anna, unmute.
It's always technical stuff. I'm very bad with that. Final book is the last, which is number 4, and the last book in the Gangland series called Framed, which I enjoyed writing, and it's due out in February. That's the last of the Kerry Casey books, and then I'll be doing something else. I don't know.
Barry, what about you?
The 8th DCI Jack Logan book is out in October. It is called something. I can't remember what it's called. A Death Most Monumental. It's set around the Glenfinnan Monument.
Great. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for being on the panel. It's been a great hour. It's passed very, very quickly. And viewers, this is only the start of this weekend festival. I'm sure Lindsay's got more to tell you about it. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you enjoy the rest. There's some goodies coming up. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
See you guys.
Bye.
Thank you very much, guys. The next panel is at 2. Sorry, not 2 o'clock. It's at 3 o'clock, and it's hashtag historical crime with Caroline Dunford, Alex Ney, and James Andrew.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Thank you.